In the blistering heat of a Montana summer, an 18-year-old girl is sold for $40 to a widowed rancher she's never met, a transaction witnessed only by God and the merciless sun. Clara Mae Winslow arrives at Wade Carver's ranch to find 3 broken children, a house drowning in grief, and a man whose heart died with his wife 2 years ago. But when wildfire threatens everything, when a child vanishes into smoke-filled darkness, and when a dangerous enemy emerges from the past, Clara must decide. Will she remain the bought girl, or become the woman who saves them all? If you're ready for a story of survival, redemption, and love born from ashes, stay until the end. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels across the world. The wagon wheel hit another rut, and Clara Mae Winslow's head struck the wooden sideboard hard enough to make her teeth click together. She didn't cry out. Crying had stopped mattering 3 days ago when her stepfather had stood in the doorway of their soddy, with his arms crossed and his eyes empty, counting $40 in silver coins like they were the answer to every prayer he'd never bothered to say. "Get on," he'd told her, jerking his chin toward the stranger waiting by the wagon. "You're his now." She was 18 years old. She owned a calico dress, a pair of worn boots, a tin cup, and absolutely nothing else in the world. The man beside her on the wagon bench hadn't spoken since they left the settlement. Wade Carver was his name. She'd heard that much from the man who'd brokered the arrangement, a traveling preacher with whiskey on his breath and pity in his eyes. Wade was 38, a widower, a rancher somewhere north of Helena. He needed help with his house and his children. That's all anyone had told her. Help. As if she were being hired. As if the $40 were wages instead of a price. Clara stole a glance at him now, trying to understand what kind of man bought another human being, and then rode in silence for 2 days straight. His face was weathered, carved by wind and sun into something hard and distant. His jaw was set like he was grinding down words he'd never say. His hands on the reins were scarred and strong, the hands of someone who'd built things and buried things and kept going when most people would have quit. He wasn't cruel. She'd learned that much already. He'd let her sleep in the wagon bed under a tarp while he slept on the ground. He'd given her jerky and hardtack without comment, same as he ate. He didn't leer or touch or make her feel like the $40 entitled him to anything beyond her presence. But he didn't look at her either. Not really. When his eyes passed over her, it was like she was furniture being transported, a necessary object with no voice worth hearing. The Montana Territory stretched around them in every direction, vast and golden and shimmering under a July sun so brutal it turned the air into something you could almost see. Grasslands rippled like an ocean made of heat. Distant mountains sat blue and hazy on the horizon, too far away to matter. The sky was huge and empty, the kind of sky that made you understand how small you were, how easy it would be to simply disappear into all that space and never be found. Clara wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, her dress stuck to her skin. Her mouth tasted like dust. "How much further?" she asked, her voice cracking from disuse. Wade didn't answer for a long moment. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Another hour." That was it. Another hour. No details, no reassurance, no attempt to prepare her for whatever waited at the end of this journey. Clara swallowed hard and looked down at her hands, folded tight in her lap. Her mother had died when she was 12. Taken by fever in the span of 3 terrible days. Her stepfather had remarried within 6 months, a sharp-eyed woman who'd made it clear from the start that Clara was a burden, an extra mouth, a girl too old to be useful and too young to be gone. When the drought hit last summer and the crops failed, Clara had known her time was running out. She'd just never imagined it would end like this. Sold. The word sat in her chest like a stone. The ranch appeared suddenly, rising out of the heat haze like something conjured. It wasn't much, a low wooden house with a sagging porch, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, a chicken coop, a well, and corrals that stretched toward a line of cottonwoods marking a creek bed. Everything looked tired. The paint was gone from the wood. The garden was mostly weeds. The whole place had the feel of something that had been left to fend for itself and was losing the fight. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down without a word. Clara sat frozen for a moment, staring at the door. Then it opened. 3 children stepped out onto the porch and stood in a silent row, staring at her with eyes that held no hope and no welcome. Just a flat, exhausted watchfulness that made Clara's throat tighten. The oldest was a boy, maybe 13, tall and rangy with his father's dark hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to be young. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression hard and closed. Next to him was a girl, perhaps 10, with pale braids and a dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to identify. She held herself very still, like a rabbit trying not to be seen. And at the end, barely visible behind his sister's skirt, was a small boy with huge eyes and dirt on his knees. He couldn't have been more than 5. Clara climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaky after 2 days of sitting. The children didn't move. They just watched her, 3 pairs of eyes weighing and measuring and finding her lacking before she'd even opened her mouth. Wade walked past her and stopped at the base of the porch steps. "This is Clara," he said, his voice flat. "She's here to help." Help. There it was again. The word that meant everything and nothing. The oldest boy's jaw tightened. "We don't need help." "Cal." Wade's voice dropped into warning territory. "We don't," Cal insisted, his eyes flashing. "We've been doing fine on our own." "You call this fine?" Wade gestured toward the house, toward the garden, toward the whole struggling operation. "You call burnt porridge and torn clothes and your sister crying herself to sleep every night fine?" The girl, June, Clara assumed, flinched like she'd been struck. Her face went red, and she looked down at her feet, Cal's hands clenched into fists. "That's not enough." Wade's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Clara's staying. You'll treat her with respect, you'll do what she says, and you'll keep your opinions to yourself unless I ask for them. Understood?" Silence. Cal's face had gone white with fury, but he didn't argue. He just turned on his heel and stalked into the house, letting the door slam behind him. June looked like she might cry. The little boy ducked completely behind her skirt. Wade sighed, a sound so tired and empty it made Clara's chest ache. "June, Eli, come say hello." June stepped forward slowly, her hands twisted in her apron. Up close, Clara could see the dark circles under her eyes, the chapped lips, the fingernails bitten down to nothing. This child had been carrying weight no 10-year-old should have to bear. "Hello," June whispered. "Hello, June," Clara said gently. "It's nice to meet you." June's eyes filled with sudden tears. She blinked them back hard and nodded, then retreated to where her little brother hid. Clara crouched down, making herself small and unthreatening. "And you must be Eli." The boy peeked out at her, one eye visible past the fabric of his sister's dress. He didn't speak. "I'm Clara," she continued, keeping her voice soft. "I'm going to be staying here for a while. I hope we can be friends." Eli stared at her for a long moment. Then he disappeared completely behind June's skirt. Wade cleared his throat. "June, show Clara where she'll sleep. Eli, you come help me with the horses." The little boy shook his head violently, clinging to his sister. "Eli," Wade's voice gentled slightly. "Come on, son. I need you." But Eli just pressed harder against June, his small hands fisting in the fabric of her dress. Wade's shoulders sagged. He looked at Clara, and for just a second she saw something crack in that hard exterior, a flash of pain so deep it was almost unbearable to witness. Then it was gone, locked away again behind stone. "June," he said quietly. "Go on." June nodded and reached for Clara's hand. Her fingers were small and cold despite the heat. "This way," she whispered. Clara followed her into the house, Eli trailing behind them like a shadow. The interior was dim and stifling, all the windows closed against the heat. It smelled like old smoke and unwashed laundry, and something sour Clara couldn't identify. The main room held a kitchen table, a cast-iron stove, a few rough chairs, and shelves that were mostly empty. Dishes were piled in a basin. The floor needed sweeping. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to either save it or finish it off. June led Clara down a short hallway and stopped at a narrow door. This was... She stopped, swallowed hard. "You can sleep here." She pushed the door open. The room was tiny, barely big enough for the narrow bed and single chair it contained, but it was clean. Someone had swept the floor. Someone had put a folded quilt at the foot of the bed. Someone had tried. "Thank you, June," Clara said. June nodded and started to leave, Eli still clinging to her skirt. "June?" Clara called softly. The girl stopped and turned back, her eyes wary. "I'm not here to replace anyone," Clara said carefully. "I'm just here to help, that's all, I promise." June's face crumpled for just a second. Then she pulled herself together with visible effort, nodded once, and fled down the hallway with her little brother in tow. Clara stood alone in the small room and felt the weight of what she'd walked into settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. This wasn't just a house that needed cleaning or children who needed feeding. This was a family drowning in grief, held together by nothing but stubborn survival and a father who'd forgotten how to be anything except hard. She sat down on the bed and put her face in her hands. She didn't cry. There would be time for that later, or maybe never. Right now, she needed to figure out how to survive this place, these people, this strange new life she'd been sold into. Outside, she heard Wade's voice, low and rough, talking to the horses. She heard Eli's high, frightened breathing and June's murmured attempts to soothe him. She heard the wind moving through the dry grass and the creak of the barn and the endless, oppressive silence underneath it all. Clara stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked back out to the main room. If she was going to be here, if she had no choice but to be here, then she might as well make herself useful. The kitchen was a disaster. Clara stood in front of the stove and assessed the damage with a practiced eye. Burnt pans crusted with God knew what. A coffee pot so thick with residue, it was a miracle anything drinkable came out of it. Flour spilled across the counter and never wiped up, now hardened into a paste. The pantry, when she finally found it, hidden behind a curtain that smelled like mildew, was shockingly sparse. A few cans of beans, some cornmeal, a bag of flour with weevils, salt, lard. That was it. She'd seen better-stocked line shacks. Clara rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She started with water, hauling bucket after bucket from the well outside. The sun beat down on her head like a hammer, and by the third trip, her dress was soaked through with sweat. But she kept going, filling the reservoir on the stove, heating water in every pot and pan that wasn't completely ruined. When the water was hot, she started scrubbing. She scoured the stove until her arms ached. She scraped burnt food out of pans. She washed dishes that looked like they hadn't been properly cleaned in months. She swept the floor, getting into corners where dust had built up into small drifts. She wiped down the table, the chairs, the shelves. She was elbow-deep in suds when June appeared in the doorway, watching her with wide eyes. "You don't have to do all that," the girl said quietly. "I know," Clara replied, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn spot on a plate. "But it needs doing, so I'm doing it." June hesitated, then stepped into the room. "Can I help?" Clara smiled at her. "I'd like that very much." They worked side by side in silence for a while, June drying dishes while Clara washed. The girl moved with careful precision, like she was afraid of breaking something. Her hands were small but competent. "How long has it been?" Clara asked gently. "Since your mother passed?" June's hands stilled on the plate she was drying. 2 years. 2 years and 3 months. "I'm sorry." June nodded, her eyes fixed on the plate. "She died having a baby. The baby died too. It was a girl. Daddy buried them together out past the cottonwoods." Clara's throat tightened. "That must have been very hard." "Cal says it's his fault," June whispered. "He says if he'd ridden for the doctor faster, if he hadn't gotten lost on the way back." "June." Clara set down the pan she was washing and turned to face the girl. "It's not Cal's fault. Birth is dangerous. Sometimes things go wrong no matter what anyone does. Your brother can't carry that blame." "I know," June said, "but he does anyway. He carries it every day. And Daddy—" She stopped, biting her lip hard. "What about your daddy?" June's eyes filled with tears. "He stopped being Daddy after Mama died. Now he's just Wade. Just the man who makes sure we don't starve. He doesn't—" Her voice broke. "He doesn't hug us anymore. He doesn't tell stories. He doesn't laugh." "It's like he died too, but his body just forgot to stop walking around." Clara pulled the girl into her arms and held her while she cried. Really cried. The kind of crying that had been held back for too long, and finally found a safe place to break. June sobbed against Clara's shoulder, her small body shaking. "I'm so tired," June gasped between sobs. "I'm so tired of being strong. I'm tired of taking care of Eli. I'm tired of trying to cook when I don't know how. I'm tired of watching Daddy disappear. I'm tired of everything." "I know," Clara murmured, stroking the girl's hair. "I know, sweetheart. But you don't have to be strong all by yourself anymore. I'm here now. Let me help carry some of it." June clung to her for a long moment, then finally pulled back, wiping her eyes on her apron. "You mean it? You're really staying?" "I'm staying," Clara said firmly. "Even though Cal's mean? Even though Daddy's the way he is?" "Even though," Clara confirmed. June looked at her with something that might have been hope. Then she picked up another plate and went back to drying, and Clara went back to washing, and together they slowly brought order to the chaos. Dinner was a tense affair. Clara had managed to make cornbread from the weevil-free portion of the flour, and had opened 2 cans of beans, heating them with a little salt and a scrap of bacon she'd found in the larder. It wasn't much, but it was better than burnt porridge. Wade sat at the head of the table, eating in silence. Cal sat across from him, also silent, stabbing at his food like it had personally offended him. June sat next to Clara, sneaking glances between them like she was waiting for something to explode. Eli sat on June's other side, so close he was practically in her lap, pushing beans around his plate without eating. "Eat, Eli," Wade said quietly. Eli shook his head. "Son, you need to eat." Eli pressed closer to June, his eyes down. Wade's jaw tightened, but he didn't push. He just went back to his own plate, methodically working his way through the food like it was a chore to be completed. Clara cleared her throat. "The pantry's pretty low. I can make a list of what we need if you're planning a trip to town soon." Wade didn't look up. "Town's 2 days' ride. We go when we have to, not before." "When's the last time you went?" "Month ago." Clara absorbed that. A month ago, and the pantry was already this bare. Either they'd started with almost nothing, or the children had been eating their way through supplies faster than Wade realized. "The well's running low, too," she added carefully, "and the garden's mostly dead." "I know." Wade's voice was flat. "Droughts hit the whole territory. Ranchers are losing cattle. Farmers are losing crops. We're lucky we've got the creek, even if it's half what it used to be." "Can I help?" "With the garden, I mean. Maybe if we focus on hardier plants." "Do what you want," Wade interrupted. "That's why you're here." The words landed like stones. That's why you're here. Not because he wanted her help, not because he valued her opinion. Because he'd paid $40 and expected a return on his investment. Cal's head came up, his eyes sharp. "You bought her." "Cal," Wade warned, "you bought her like you'd buy a horse or a plow. $40 for a girl to clean your house and raise your kids because you can't be bothered to—" Wade's hand hit the table so hard the plates jumped. "Enough!" "It's true." Cal shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "Mama's dead, and you replaced her with some girl you don't even know, some stranger you paid for like she's—" "I said enough!" Wade stood too, his chair scraping back. "You will not speak to me that way. You will not—" "Why?" "Because you're my father?" Cal's voice cracked. "You stopped being my father the day you let Mama die." The silence that followed was absolute. Wade's face had gone white. His hands were shaking. For a moment, Clara thought he might hit the boy, but he didn't. He just stood there, breathing hard, looking at his son like he was staring at something that had broken beyond all repair. Then he turned and walked out of the house. The door didn't slam. It closed quietly, which was somehow worse. Cal stood frozen, his anger draining away into something that looked like horror. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," June said quietly. She was crying again, silent tears streaming down her face. "You meant it, Cal. You always mean it." Cal looked at his sister, at Eli, at Clara, and then he fled too, running out the back door and disappearing into the dusk. Eli started to cry, a high, keening sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his small chest. June pulled him into her lap and rocked him, her own tears falling into his hair. Clara sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, and wondered what on earth she was supposed to do with any of this. Night fell fast in Montana territory, the sun dropping below the horizon and taking all the light with it. Clara finished cleaning up from dinner, such as it was, and settled June and Eli into their beds. Eli had finally cried himself out and fallen asleep clutching his sister's hand. June had looked at Clara with exhausted, red-rimmed eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Clara had no idea what she was being thanked for, but she'd nodded anyway. Cal hadn't come back. Wade hadn't come back. The house sat quiet and dark, except for a single lamp burning in the kitchen. Clara sat at the table listening to the night sounds, crickets, the wind moving through the grass, the occasional call of an owl. She should probably go to bed. She was exhausted, her body aching from the travel and the work. But something kept her in the kitchen, waiting. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. Around midnight, the door opened. Wade stepped inside, moving quietly, like he was trying not to wake anyone. He stopped when he saw Clara sitting at the table. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you," Clara replied. Wade stood there for a moment, then moved to the stove and poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot Clara had left warming. He took a long drink, his back to her. "My son hates me," he said finally, his voice rough. Clara chose her words carefully. "Your son is 13 years old and angry at the world because he lost his mother and he doesn't know how to grieve. He doesn't hate you, he just doesn't know how to reach you anymore." Wade's shoulders tensed. "You've been here one day. You don't know anything about us." "You're right," Clara agreed. "I don't. But I know what grief looks like. I know what happens when people stop talking to each other. And I know that if you keep going the way you're going to lose those children long before they're grown." Wade turned to face her, his expression hard. "What do you want me to do? I'm keeping them fed. I'm keeping a roof over their heads. I'm doing everything I can just to keep this place running." "They don't need a roof," Clara said quietly. "They need a father." "Their father died with their mother," Wade shot back. "What's left isn't enough for anybody." Clara met his eyes. "Then maybe it's time to figure out how to be enough anyway." They stared at each other across the dim kitchen. This man who'd bought her, and this girl who'd been sold, two people thrown together by desperation and circumstance, trying to figure out how to survive each other. Finally, Wade looked away. "Get some sleep, Clara. Tomorrow won't be any easier than today." He set down his cup and walked past her toward his own room, his footsteps heavy and tired. Clara sat alone in the kitchen for a while longer, then made her way to her small room. She lay down on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around her. Somewhere in the darkness, a child whimpered in his sleep. Somewhere else, a man lay awake with ghosts. And somewhere out in the night, an angry boy sat alone with his guilt and his grief. Clara closed her eyes. She'd promised June she would stay. She'd promised to help. She just hoped she was strong enough to keep those promises. Because this family wasn't just broken, it was shattered. And putting shattered things back together required more than clean dishes and hot meals. It required something Clara wasn't sure she had, but she was going to try anyway. Because what else could she do? The sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Clara woke to the sound of someone moving in the kitchen. She dressed quickly in the gray light of dawn and found Wade already at the stove, attempting to make coffee with the grim determination of a man facing an unpleasant but necessary task. "I can do that," Clara offered quietly. Wade didn't turn around. "I've been making my own coffee for 2 years." "I know, but I'm awake now and I'm here, so let me help." He stepped aside without a word, and Clara took over, her hands moving through the familiar ritual of measuring grounds and water. The silence between them wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just empty, waiting to be filled with something neither of them knew how to name. When the coffee was ready, Wade poured himself a cup and stood by the window, looking out at the ranch as light slowly bled into the sky. Clara poured her own cup and joined him, keeping a respectful distance. "Cal came back about 3 a.m, Wade said finally. "I heard him climb through his window." "Did you talk to him?" "No." Wade's jaw tightened. "What would I say?" Clara sipped her coffee, choosing her words carefully. "You could tell him you love him. You could tell him it's not his fault. You could tell him you miss his mother too. Wade's knuckles went white around his cup. He knows all that. Does he? Because from where I'm standing, all he knows is that his father can barely look at him. Wade turned to face her, and there was something dangerous in his eyes. You think you understand us after one day? You think you can walk in here and fix everything with soft words and clean dishes? No, Clara said steadily. I think you're all drowning, and I think you're too stubborn to reach for help even when it's standing right in front of you. They stared at each other in the growing light, tension crackling between them like summer lightning. Then Wade set down his cup with a sharp click and walked out, the door closing behind him with finality. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding and returned to the kitchen to start breakfast. By the time the children emerged, she had cornmeal mush cooking on the stove and had managed to coax a few eggs out of the bedraggled chickens scratching around the yard. It wasn't much, but it was hot and it was ready, which seemed to be more than these children were used to. June came first, carrying Eli on her hip, even though the boy was getting too big to be carried. Her eyes were still swollen from crying, but she managed a small smile when she saw Clara at the stove. "Morning," June whispered. "Good morning, sweetheart. Can you set the table while I finish these eggs?" June nodded and set Eli down gently, then began pulling plates from the shelf with practiced efficiency. Eli remained where she'd left him, standing in the middle of the kitchen floor in his nightshirt, watching Clara with those enormous eyes. Clara crouched down to his level. "Good morning, Eli. Did you sleep well?" The boy didn't answer, but he didn't run away either, which felt like progress. "I'm making eggs," Clara continued conversationally. "Do you like eggs?" Eli's gaze flickered to the pan, then back to her face. After a long moment, he gave the smallest nod. "Good. Me too, especially with a little salt." She stood and returned to the stove, giving him space. "June, is your brother awake?" "Cal's already outside," June said quietly. "He left before dawn. I heard him go." Clara absorbed that information and said nothing. If the boy needed to work out his anger through physical labor, that was between him and his father. They ate breakfast in near silence, just the three of them, Clara, June, and Eli. The little boy ate slowly, his eyes never leaving Clara's face, like he was still trying to figure out if she was real or if she might disappear like everything else he'd ever loved. Halfway through the meal, June spoke up. "Miss Clara?" "Just Clara is fine, honey." "Clara," June corrected herself carefully. "Are you going to leave?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with fear. "No," Clara said firmly. "I'm not leaving." "But what if—" June's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "What if Daddy sends you away? What if he decides he doesn't want you here anymore?" Clara set down her fork and reached across the table to take June's small hand in hers. "Your father brought me here because you all need help. I intend to give it, and unless he physically puts me back in that wagon and drives me away himself, I'm staying." "Promise?" June's eyes were desperate. "I promise." Eli, who had been watching this exchange with fierce attention, suddenly slid off his chair and came around the table. He climbed into Clara's lap without warning, his small body fitting against hers like he'd been doing it his whole life. Then he pressed his face into her shoulder and held on. Clara's throat tightened. She wrapped her arms around the child and held him close, feeling the rapid flutter of his heart against her chest. June was crying again, silent tears streaming down her face, but this time she was smiling through them. They stayed like that for a long time, this fragile moment of connection in a house that had forgotten what connection felt like. When Eli finally pulled back, he looked at Clara with something new in his eyes. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Then he climbed down and took his sister's hand, and together they left the kitchen, leaving Clara alone with the breakfast dishes and a feeling in her chest that was equal parts hope and terror. She had just promised these children she wouldn't leave. She had just given them her word. Now she had to figure out how to keep it. The morning heat came on fast and merciless. By the time Clara finished the dishes and started tackling the rest of the house, sweat was already running down her back. She opened windows to catch any hint of breeze, but the air that came through was like opening an oven door, hot and dry and offering no relief. She swept floors, beat rugs, scrubbed surfaces that probably hadn't been properly cleaned since Mary Carver had died. Every corner she investigated revealed more evidence of a household slowly falling apart. Mended clothes that needed mending again, furniture held together with hope and horseshoe nails, a clock on the mantel that had stopped at 3:10 and never been wound again. In Mary's room, Wade's room now, she supposed, though it didn't look like he spent much time there, Clara found a rocking chair draped with a woman's shawl. She picked it up carefully, the fabric soft and faded, and held it to her face. It smelled like lavender and dust and old grief. She folded it carefully and placed it in the trunk at the foot of the bed, closing the lid gently. By midday, the heat was almost unbearable. Clara went to the well to draw water and found Cal there, stripped to the waist and splitting wood with violent efficiency. Each swing of the axe was precise and angry, the blade biting deep into the logs. He didn't acknowledge her presence, didn't slow his rhythm, just kept swinging, kept splitting, kept working like he could chop his way through whatever was eating him alive. Clara filled her bucket and turned to go, then stopped. Cal. The axe froze mid-swing. The boy didn't turn around. I'm not trying to replace your mother, Clara said quietly. I know I couldn't even if I wanted to. But those children in there need someone who can help them. And your father needs someone who can keep this house from falling down around all of you. That's all I'm trying to do. Cal lowered the axe and turned to face her. Up close, she could see how much he looked like Wade. The same strong jaw, the same dark eyes, the same stubborn set to his shoulders. But where Wade had gone hard and distant, Cal was all raw edges and barely contained fury. You think you can fix us? He asked, his voice rough. No, Clara said honestly. I think you're all going to have to fix yourselves. But maybe I can help keep things together while you do. Cal studied her for a long moment, sweat running down his chest, his hands gripping the axe handle like it was the only solid thing in his world. He bought you. Yes. That doesn't bother you? Clara met his eyes steadily. Everything about my life bothers me. But being bothered doesn't change anything. Working does. So that's what I'm going to do. Something shifted in Cal's expression, not acceptance, but maybe a grudging respect. He nodded once and turned back to his woodpile. Clara carried her water back to the house. That afternoon, she tackled the garden. It was even worse than she'd thought. Rows of withered plants barely clinging to life, soil baked hard as clay, weeds that seemed to be the only things thriving. But there were a few struggling tomato plants, some herbs that might be salvageable, and the determined remains of what had once been a potato patch. She hauled water from the well bucket by bucket, soaking the ground around anything that looked like it might survive. The sun hammered down on her head and shoulders. Her hands blistered. Her back screamed. But she kept going, because what else was there to do? She was knee-deep in dirt when June appeared with a jar of water and a worried expression. You should rest, the girl said. You'll make yourself sick in this heat. I'm all right, Clara assured her, accepting the water gratefully. I've worked in worse. June sat down in the shade of the porch and watched Clara work. After a while, she said, Mama loved the garden. She used to say it was her sanctuary, the one place where things grew instead of just surviving. Clara sat back on her heels. What happened to it after she died? Daddy tried to keep it going at first, but then the drought got bad, and he had to choose between watering the garden or the cattle. The cattle keep us fed, so June shrugged, but her eyes were sad. It died like everything else. Well, Clara said, looking at the struggling plants around her, maybe it doesn't have to stay dead. She worked until the sun started to sink toward the horizon, until her muscles trembled with exhaustion and her skin felt burned raw. When she finally dragged herself back to the house, she found Wade standing on the porch, watching her with an unreadable expression. You didn't have to do all that, he said. I know. Clara set down her bucket and wiped her face with her apron. But it needed doing. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then, thank you. The words were stiff, like he'd forgotten how to say them and had to dig them out of some buried place. But they were real, and they mattered. Clara nodded and went inside to start dinner. That night, all 5 of them sat at the table together. Clara had managed to make something resembling a stew from canned beef and the few salvageable vegetables she'd found. It wasn't much, but it was hot, and it filled stomachs, and that was enough. Cal ate in silence, but at least he was there. Eli sat next to Clara again, close enough that their arms touched. June helped pass dishes and managed to eat a full plate without crying once. And Wade sat at the head of the table, slowly working through his food, occasionally glancing at his children like he was trying to remember who they used to be. After dinner, while Clara washed dishes and June dried, Wade pulled out a ledger and began going through accounts. Cal disappeared outside to finish chores. Eli played quietly on the floor with some carved wooden animals that had probably been his since he was a baby. It was almost peaceful. Then Eli screamed. Clara spun around to find the little boy backed into a corner, his eyes huge with terror, pointing at something on the floor. A snake, not large but enough to be dangerous, coiled near the doorway, its tongue flicking in and out. Wade moved fast, grabbing a broom and sweeping the snake out the door in one smooth motion. But Eli was already beyond comfort, sobbing hysterically, his small body shaking with fear. Clara went to him immediately, dropping to her knees and pulling him into her arms. "It's all right, sweetheart. It's gone. Your father got rid of it. You're safe." But Eli couldn't stop crying, great gasping sobs that seemed to tear themselves out of his chest. June hovered nearby, her face white, wringing her hands. Wade stood frozen with the broom, looking at his terrified son like he didn't know how to reach him. "Eli," Wade said gruffly. "Son, it's all right. The snake's gone." But Eli just cried harder, burrowing into Clara's shoulder. Clara caught Wade's eye and shook her head slightly. Not now. She carried Eli to the rocking chair by the window and sat down, holding him close, rocking gently while he sobbed. She hummed quietly, a tune her own mother had once hummed to her when she was small and frightened, a melody with no words that somehow said everything that mattered. Gradually, Eli's sobs quieted, his breathing slowed, his small hands loosened their death grip on her dress. "My mama used to sing," he whispered finally, his voice hoarse. "She used to rock me and sing when I had bad dreams." "What did she sing?" Clara asked softly. "I don't remember." Eli's voice broke. "I don't remember her voice anymore. I try and try, but I can't hear it. It's gone." Clara's heart cracked clean through. She looked up and saw Wade standing across the room, his face stricken, his hands clenched at his sides. June was crying silently again. Even Cal had come back inside and stood in the doorway, his young face twisted with pain. "My mama died when I was 12, Clara told Eli gently. "And you're right. After a while, I couldn't remember her voice either. It hurt so much I thought I might die from it. But you know what I learned?" Eli pulled back slightly to look at her. "What?" "I learned that love doesn't need a voice to be real. Your mama loved you, and that love is still here. It's in every good thing you do, every kind thought you have, every time you're brave, even when you're scared. That's her voice now. It's just speaking in a different way." Eli stared at her with those enormous eyes, processing this, weighing it against his grief. "Do you think she can see me?" Clara glanced at Wade, who was watching them with an expression she couldn't read. "I think if love is strong enough, it finds a way to stay close to the people who need it most." Eli nodded slowly and rested his head back against her shoulder. Within minutes, exhausted from crying, he fell asleep in her arms. Clara continued rocking gently, not wanting to disturb him. June came and sat at her feet, leaning against her knee. Cal remained in the doorway, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. And Wade stood across the room, looking at this tableau. This stranger holding his sleeping son, his daughter curled against her, his oldest watching from the shadows, and something in his expression shifted. The hard shell cracked, just a little, and Clara saw what was underneath. He wasn't just grieving his wife. He was grieving his ability to be what his children needed. He'd locked himself away because being close hurt too much, because loving meant risking loss, and he'd already lost everything that mattered. But his children were still here, still breathing, still needing, and he'd forgotten how to reach them. Clara held his gaze across the room, this unspoken understanding passing between them. Then Wade looked away and left the house, the door closing softly behind him. June sniffled and wiped her eyes. "He loved us once," she whispered. "Before Mama died, he used to carry Eli on his shoulders. He used to help Cal with his reading. He used to tease me until I laughed so hard I couldn't breathe. He was so different. He's still in there," Clara said quietly. He's just lost. People get lost sometimes when they hurt too much. Can they find their way back? Clara thought about her own stepfather, who'd sold her without a second thought. She thought about all the people she'd known who'd let hardship turn them mean or cold or empty, and then she thought about the rare ones who found their way through the darkness back to something resembling light. Some can, she said honestly, if they have a reason to try. June absorbed this in silence. Then, will you help him find his way back? Clara looked down at the sleeping child in her arms, at the girl leaning against her knee, at the boy in the doorway who was trying so hard to be a man when he was still just a hurting child. I'll try, she promised. I can't promise I'll succeed, but I'll try. Cal made a sound that might have been scoff or might have been something else. Then he turned and went outside, probably to find his father. June stayed where she was, and eventually she fell asleep too, her head resting against Clara's leg. Clara sat in the growing darkness, rocking gently, holding these broken pieces of a shattered family, and wondered how on earth she was going to keep the promises she kept making. But she'd worry about that tomorrow. Tonight, these children needed to feel safe. That was enough for now. The next few days fell into a rhythm that was somewhere between routine and survival. Clara woke before dawn, made breakfast, cleaned, hauled water, tended the struggling garden, made lunch, cleaned some more, made dinner, and fell into bed so exhausted she barely remembered lying down. The heat never let up. Each day felt like standing in a furnace. The well dropped lower. The creek that ran through the property shrank to a trickle. Cattle wandered farther looking for water. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for relief that wouldn't come. Wade worked from sunup to sundown, riding out to check fences, move cattle, search for better grazing. He spoke little, ate mechanically, and disappeared into his own head whenever he was in the house. But Clara noticed small changes. He'd started actually looking at his children when they spoke, instead of just staring through them. He'd stopped leaving immediately after meals. He was trying, in his limited way, to be present. Cal remained distant, but less hostile. He worked alongside his father most days, coming back sunburned and exhausted, eating in silence and then disappearing to his room. But twice Clara had caught him watching Eli play, his face soft with something that looked like regret. June blossomed under Clara's attention like a plant finally given water. She helped with cooking, with cleaning, with Eli. She talked more, smiled occasionally, even laughed once when Clara told a story about a chicken she'd owned as a child that had terrorized the entire household. The sound of that laugh was so unexpected and bright that everyone had stopped and stared at her like she'd performed magic. And Eli, sweet, damaged Eli, started following Clara everywhere. He didn't talk much, but he stayed close, his small hand finding hers when he was scared or tired or just needed to know she was real. At night, he would appear in her doorway, unable to sleep, and she would let him climb into her bed and tell him stories until he drifted off. Then she'd carry him back to his own room and tuck him in, and June would whisper thank you from her bed across the room. It was the morning of Clara's 8th day at the ranch when everything changed. She was in the garden trying to save what she could from the heat when she heard horses approaching. Not Wade. He'd ridden out hours ago. Someone else. Clara stood and shaded her eyes against the sun. 3 riders came up the road, moving slow and deliberate. Even from a distance, she could tell they weren't friendly. There was something predatory in the way they sat their horses, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She walked to the house and found June on the porch, Eli hiding behind her skirt as usual. "Who are they?" June asked, her voice tight with fear. "I don't know. Stay inside with Eli. Don't come out unless I call you." June nodded and pulled her brother through the door, but Clara could see them watching through the window. The riders stopped in front of the house. The man in the middle was big, well-dressed by frontier standards, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The 2 men flanking him wore guns low on their hips and expressions that said they knew how to use them. "Morning," the big man called out cheerfully. "Wade Carver around?" "He's out checking fences," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" The man's eyes traveled over her slowly, assessing. "You must be the new help I heard about. Roy Hale's my name." He tipped his hat mockingly. "I own the spread east of here. Just thought I'd ride over and introduce myself, see how my neighbors are faring in this heat. Clara didn't believe that for a second. That's kind of you. I'll tell Mr. Carver you stopped by. No need to rush me off, Roy said, still smiling. It's hot as blazes. Maybe I could trouble you for some water for myself and my men. It wasn't really a request. Clara nodded and went inside, filling 3 cups from the pitcher she kept cool in the pantry. When she came back out, Roy had dismounted and was standing on the porch, looking around like he owned the place. She handed him a cup, then gave water to the other 2 men, who hadn't dismounted. Roy drank slowly, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. You're a pretty thing. How'd you end up way out here? Mr. Carver needed help with his house and children. Is that right? Roy's smile widened. Funny, the way I heard it, old Wade bought himself a mail-order bride from that traveling preacher. $40 for a fresh young thing to warm his bed and raise his brats. Clara's face went hot, but she kept her voice level. I'm here to work, Mr. Hale. Nothing more. Sure you are, honey. Sure you are. He handed back the cup, his fingers brushing hers deliberately. You ever get tired of playing housemaid to a broken-down widower and his damaged kids? You come see me. I could use someone with your... His eyes traveled over her body again. Qualities. Clara stepped back, putting distance between them. I'm happy where I am. For now, Roy said easily. But this ranch is dying, sweetheart. The drought's killing Wade's cattle. His wells are running dry. His credit's no good in town. Give it 6 months, maybe a year, and this place will be dust. When that happens, you'll need somewhere to land. My door's always open. He tipped his hat again and remounted his horse. The 3 men turned to leave, but Roy looked back over his shoulder. Tell Wade I stopped by. Tell him Roy Hale sends his regards. Then they were gone, riding away in a cloud of dust. Clara stood on the porch, her heart hammering until they disappeared from view. Then she went inside where June and Eli were huddled together on the floor. Who was that? June whispered. Nobody good, Clara said grimly. Where's Cal? Out in the barn. Clara found Cal mucking out stalls, and the moment he saw her face, he went still. What happened? She told him about Roy Hale's visit, about the veiled threats and the ugly implications. Cal's face went dark with fury. That bastard, he spat. He's been circling this place since Mama died, trying to buy Daddy out. Daddy keeps refusing, so now Roy's trying to wait him out, waiting for us to fail so he can swoop in and take everything. Why does he want this ranch so badly? Water rights. Our creek feeds into the main river. If Roy controlled this land, he'd control water access for half the territory. He could charge whatever he wanted, drive out anyone who couldn't pay. Cal's hands clenched into fists. Daddy would rather die than give him this land. And Roy knows that, Clara said quietly, which means he's going to find another way to take it. Cal met her eyes, and in that moment, he looked much older than 13. We need to tell Daddy. Yes, Clara agreed. We do. When Wade rode in that evening, dusty and tired, Clara met him at the barn. She told him about Roy's visit, leaving nothing out. Not the threats, not the leering looks, not the implications about why she was really there. Wade's face went hard as stone. He touched you? Just my hand when I gave him water. But Wade, did he threaten you? Not directly, but yes. There was a threat in everything he said. Wade was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he said very quietly, Stay away from him. If he comes back when I'm not here, you get the children inside and you get my rifle from above the mantel. You don't open the door, you don't talk to him, you just wait for me to come home. Understood? Clara nodded. Cal told me Roy wants this ranch, the water rights. Roy wants everything he can't have, Wade said bitterly. And he doesn't care who he destroys getting it. Wade, Clara hesitated, then pushed forward. Is there something else? Something you're not telling me? Wade looked at her, and for just a second, his guard dropped completely. She saw fear there, raw and real. Mary was afraid of him, he said finally. In the months before she died, she mentioned him watching her in town, finding excuses to talk to her, showing up at church when he'd never gone before. She asked me if we could move, go somewhere else. I told her she was imagining things. I told her Roy Hale was just a bully, nothing more. His voice cracked on the last words. And now he's here again, Clara said softly. And you're wondering what else you missed. Wade turned away, his shoulders rigid. Get inside, Clara. Make sure the children stay close to the house until I figure out what to do about this. Clara wanted to press further, wanted to make him talk about Mary and Roy and whatever dark history existed between them. But she could see he was barely holding himself together, so she left him alone and went back to the house. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara sat in the kitchen and thought about Roy Hale's smile and the way he'd looked at her like she was something to be taken. And she thought about Mary Carver, dead these 2 years, buried in a grave her husband visited every Sunday. And she wondered if Mary's death had been as simple as childbirth gone wrong, or if there was something darker lurking in this story, something no one wanted to speak aloud. Outside, the wind picked up, hot and restless, carrying the smell of dust and dying grass. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. But no rain came. It never did. The storm that had been threatening finally broke 3 days later, but it brought no relief. Lightning split the sky in jagged white scars, thunder shook the windows, and wind howled across the prairie like something wounded and furious. But the rain that came was brief and mean, barely enough to settle the dust before it stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind nothing but the smell of ozone and disappointment. Clara stood on the porch watching the clouds roll away, revealing a sky gone strange and orange in the late afternoon light. The air felt wrong, charged with something she couldn't name. Wade was out checking the herd with Cal, making sure the lightning hadn't spooked the cattle into running. June was inside putting Eli down for a nap, singing to him softly the way Clara had taught her. Everything seemed normal, quiet. Then Clara saw the smoke. It started as a thin, dark line on the eastern horizon, barely visible against the strange sky. But even as she watched, it grew thicker, wider, spreading like spilled ink across the land. The wind shifted, and suddenly she could smell it. Grass burning, sagebrush crackling, the distinctive sharp scent of wildfire. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. She ran inside and found June coming out of the children's room. Get Eli up. Get him dressed. Don't let him see you're scared. June's eyes went wide. What's wrong? There's a fire, east of here, but the wind's blowing this direction. We need to be ready in case your father comes back and tells us to run. To June's credit, she didn't panic. She just nodded and went back into the bedroom, moving quickly but calmly. Clara could hear her waking Eli gently, her voice steady, even though Clara knew she had to be terrified. Clara went to the window and watched the smoke grow. It was moving fast, pushed by the same hot wind that had been tormenting them for weeks. She could see the orange glow now beneath the black plume, could imagine the flames eating their way through the dry grass, consuming everything in their path. She grabbed buckets and started filling them from the well, her mind racing through everything she'd need if they had to defend the house. Wet blankets to cover the windows. Anything flammable moved away from the walls. The animals turned loose so they could run if the fire came too close. She was hauling her third bucket when she heard horses coming hard and fast. Wade and Cal appeared through the smoke haze, both of them filthy with ash and riding like demons were chasing them. Wade pulled up short, his horse dancing and blowing. Fire jumped the creek. It's heading straight for us. How long do we have? Clara asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. Hour, maybe less if the wind keeps up. I need to get the cattle moved to the north pasture, away from the flames. Cal's going to help me. Wade looked at his son, and something passed between them, fear and trust and a wordless understanding. You stay here with Clara. Keep the children safe. If the fire gets close, you run north toward the Holt's place. Don't wait for us. Just run. Daddy, Cal's voice cracked. You hear me, son? You get your brother and sister out of here no matter what. That's your job now. Protect them. Cal nodded, his young face gone pale but determined. Yes, sir. Wade looked at Clara then, really looked at her, and she saw everything he couldn't say written in his eyes. Keep them alive. Don't let my children burn. Save them even if you can't save me. We'll be ready, Clara said firmly. Wade nodded once and wheeled his horse around, Cal following close behind. They disappeared into the smoke, riding toward the approaching fire, and Clara felt her chest tighten with a fear she couldn't afford to entertain. She ran back inside and found June and Eli standing in the main room, both dressed, Both wide-eyed with terror they were trying hard to hide. "Listen to me," Clara said, crouching down to their level. "There's a fire coming, but we're going to be smart about this. We're going to prepare, and if we need to leave, we'll leave. Your father and Cal are moving the cattle to safety. Our job is to protect the house if we can, and protect each other no matter what. Can you do that?" June nodded. Eli grabbed Clara's hand and held on tight. "Good. June, I need you to help me soak blankets and hang them over the windows. Eli, you're going to help me move anything that can catch fire away from the walls. We're going to work together, and we're going to be all right." They worked fast, all three of them moving with purpose. Clara soaked every blanket she could find and hung them over windows and doors. She moved furniture away from the walls, cleared the porch of anything that might ignite, filled every container she could find with water. June worked beside her without complaint, her small face set with determination. Even Eli helped, carrying small items and staying close to Clara's side. The smoke got thicker. The sky turned from orange to red to an ugly brown. Clara could hear the fire now, a distant roar like an approaching train. The wind picked up, hot and harsh, carrying embers that fell like deadly snow. Clara stamped out the small fires that started in the dry grass around the house, her heart pounding. One ember landed on the barn roof and began to smolder. She climbed up with a bucket and doused it before it could spread, her hands shaking with adrenaline. When she climbed down, she found Cal riding back alone. "Where's your father?" Clara demanded. "Still with the herd. He sent me back to help you." Cal dismounted and immediately started beating out embers with a wet sack. "It's bad, Clara. The fire's moving faster than we thought. If the wind doesn't shift, then we deal with it," Clara cut him off, not wanting June and Eli to hear the fear in his voice. "Help me wet down the barn. If it catches, we'll lose everything." They worked together, hauling water, beating out sparks, watching the fire creep closer. The heat was immense now, even from a distance. Clara's lungs burned from breathing smoke. Her eyes watered. Her clothes were soaked with sweat and filthy with ash. Inside the house, June was keeping Eli calm, singing to him, telling him stories, being braver than any 10-year-old should have to be. The fire was maybe a quarter-mile away when Wade finally came back, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. He took one look at the approaching wall of flame and made his decision. "We can't fight this. We run. Now." "The house," Clara started, "can be rebuilt. My children can't. Move!" Clara ran inside and grabbed June and Eli. Cal was already saddling horses in the barn, working with desperate speed. Wade threw what supplies he could into saddlebags, food, water, blankets, while Clara got the children mounted. "June, you ride with me," Clara said. "Eli goes with your father." But when Wade reached for Eli, the little boy screamed and clung to Clara with desperate strength. "Eli, we have to go," Wade said, his voice urgent but gentle. "You have to come with me." "No, I want Clara. I want Clara." Eli was hysterical now, the fear he'd been holding back finally breaking through. Clara made a split-second decision. "Give him to me. I can ride with both of them." "You can't manage 2 children on a horse in a fire," Wade protested. "I can and I will. Give him to me." There was no time to argue. Wade lifted Eli up to Clara, who settled him in front of her and pulled June up behind. The horse shifted under the extra weight, but held steady. "North," Wade ordered. "Fast as you can. Don't look back." They rode. The fire chased them like a living thing, roaring and crackling and consuming everything in its path. Embers fell around them. The smoke was so thick Clara could barely see Wade and Cal riding ahead. June's arms were locked around Clara's waist, and Eli sobbed against her chest, his small body shaking with terror. Clara's horse stumbled once, twice, struggling with the weight and the smoke and the fear. Clara kept it moving through sheer force of will, her legs aching, her arms burning from holding both children secure. Behind them she heard something collapse with a tremendous crash. The barn, maybe, or the house itself. She didn't look back. Couldn't afford to. They rode until the smoke thinned, until the roar of the fire faded to a distant rumble, until Wade finally pulled up and signaled them to stop. They were in an area of sparse grass and exposed rock, nothing for the fire to feed on. Behind them, the sky was black with smoke. Ahead, the land stretched empty and safe. Clara slid off her horse and pulled both children down with her, Her legs gave out, and they all three collapsed onto the ground, coughing and gasping. June was crying. Eli was still clinging to Clara. Cal sat on his horse with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Wade dismounted and came to them, dropping to his knees and pulling all three children against him in a fierce embrace. "You're safe. You're safe. I've got you." It was the first time since Mary's death that Clara had seen him hold his children like that, like they were precious, like losing them would destroy him. June sobbed into his chest. Cal leaned against his father's shoulder. Eli reached for Wade with one hand while keeping the other fisted in Clara's dress, kneading both of them. Wade looked at Clara over his children's heads, and she saw tears cutting clean tracks through the ash on his face. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for saving them." Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded. They stayed like that for a long time, this broken family holding on to each other while behind them everything they owned burned to ashes. When the children finally calmed enough to let go, Wade stood and looked back toward where the ranch had been. The smoke was still too thick to see anything clearly, but the glow of flames was visible even from here. "We'll head to the Holt's place," he said quietly. "Martha will take us in for the night. Tomorrow, when the fire's burned out, we'll go back and see what's left." If anything was left, Clara thought, but didn't say. They rode slowly now, exhausted and heartbroken, toward the neighboring ranch. The Holt place appeared as the sun was setting, a sturdy house with lamplight in the windows and smoke rising from the chimney, the good kind of smoke, the kind that meant warmth and safety and home. Martha Holt came out onto her porch when she heard the horses, took one look at them, and immediately started calling for her husband and sons. Within minutes, they were surrounded by helping hands. The children were taken inside and cleaned up. The horses were seen to. Wade and Cal were given water and a place to sit. And Clara found herself in Martha's kitchen, being fed soup and cornbread while the older woman clucked and fussed over her like a mother hen. "That fire came out of nowhere," Martha said, her weathered face creased with worry. "Lightning strike, most likely. In this drought, everything's just waiting to burn. You're lucky you got out." "We almost didn't," Clara said quietly. Martha studied her with sharp eyes. "You're the girl Wade brought in, the one he hired to help with the house." "Yes, ma'am." Martha poured her more coffee. "Heard some talk in town about that. Heard Roy Hale's been spreading stories about Wade buying himself a young wife." Clara's head came up. "It's not like that." "I know it's not, honey. I can see it in your eyes. But Roy Hale doesn't care about truth. He cares about what he can use." Martha sat down across from Clara and lowered her voice. "I need to tell you something. Something Wade probably won't say because he's got too much pride and too much pain." Clara leaned forward, listening. "Mary Carver didn't die easy," Martha said quietly. "The labor was hard and she was scared before it even started. She told me, maybe a month before the baby came, that Roy Hale had been following her. Not just in town, out here. She'd see him watching the house. She'd find him on the road when she was out riding. He'd show up at church and sit behind her, close enough that she could feel his breath on her neck." Clara felt ice slide down her spine. "Did she tell Wade?" "She tried, but Wade—" Martha shook her head sadly. "Wade was proud. Couldn't imagine any man would dare pursue another man's wife so openly. Thought Mary was just nervous about the baby, seeing threats where there weren't any. He told her not to worry, that Roy was just a bully with a big mouth." But she was right to be afraid. "Yes," Martha said grimly. "And the night she went into labor, Wade sent Cal for the doctor. But Cal got lost in the dark, turned around, didn't make it back until it was too late. Mary and the baby died before the doctor ever arrived." She paused, her eyes hard. "But here's the thing nobody talks about. The next day, Roy Hale showed up at the ranch with flowers and sympathy, saying he'd heard about Mary's passing. How'd he hear so fast? How'd he know, when they hadn't told anyone yet?" Clara's breath caught. "You think he was watching the house?" "I think Roy Hale wanted Mary Carver, and when he couldn't have her, he made sure Wade knew he was still there, still waiting, still watching. And I think Wade's carried that guilt ever since, that he didn't protect his wife, that he didn't believe her when she told him she was afraid." Clara thought about Wade's haunted eyes, about the way he'd locked himself away from his children, about the guilt that ate at him every single day. Why are you telling me this? Clara asked. Martha reached across the table and took Clara's hand. Because Roy Hale doesn't give up on what he wants. He wanted Mary. Now Mary's gone, but the ranch is still there, and you're there, and Wade's vulnerable. Roy's gonna come at you all from every direction he can think of, and you need to understand what you're dealing with. What am I dealing with? Martha's expression went hard as stone. A man who burned his first family to death in their sleep and got away with it by calling it an accident. A man who has no limits and no conscience. A man who will destroy anything he can't possess. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. His first family died in a fire about 8 years ago. House burned down with his wife and 2 children inside. Roy was conveniently away that night, gambling in Helena. He collected the insurance money, bought himself a bigger ranch, and never shed a tear. Martha's grip on Clara's hand tightened. So you understand what I'm saying? That fire today could have been lightning, could have been the drought, or could have been something else entirely. Clara pulled her hand back, her mind racing. You think Roy started the fire? I think it's mighty convenient that a fire breaks out on Wade's land right when the drought's at its worst, right when Wade's most vulnerable, right when Roy's been sniffing around making threats. Martha stood and paced to the window, looking out into the darkness. I think Roy Hale's getting impatient, and impatient men do dangerous things. Clara sat in silence, processing this information. If Martha was right, if Roy had deliberately set fire to Wade's ranch, then everything was worse than she'd imagined. This wasn't just about land or water rights or even Mary's ghost. This was about a predator who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. And now Clara and the children were caught in the middle of it. Martha turned back to face her. You seem like a strong girl, stronger than you look. Those children need someone strong right now. Wade needs someone strong. Can you be that for them? Clara thought about Eli's small hand in hers, about June's tentative trust, about Cal's barely contained fury, about Wade's crumbling defenses. She thought about the promises she'd made and the life she'd been sold into and the fact that she had absolutely nowhere else to go. Yes, she said firmly. I can. Martha smiled, a fierce, proud smile that transformed her weathered face. Good. Then let's talk about what happens next. They talked late into the night, making plans, discussing strategies, figuring out how to protect a family that was already so broken it seemed impossible to damage further. When Clara finally made her way to the room Martha had prepared for her, she found June and Eli already asleep in the bed, curled together like puppies seeking warmth. She climbed in carefully, and Eli immediately rolled toward her, pressing against her side. June's arm came around both of them, and Clara lay there in the darkness, listening to the children breathe, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. Tomorrow they would go back to the ranch and see what the fire had left behind. Tomorrow they would have to face whatever came next, Roy Hale's threats, the ranch's survival, the question of whether they could rebuild or if this was the end of everything Wade had worked for. But tonight, these children were safe and warm and breathing. That was enough. It had to be enough. The dawn came gray and hazy, the sky still thick with smoke. Clara woke to find both children watching her with wide, worried eyes. Is our house gone? Eli whispered. I don't know, sweetheart. We'll find out today. They dressed in borrowed clothes Martha had found for them. Too big for the children, too small for Clara, but clean and smoke-free. Martha fed them breakfast and packed supplies, her capable hands moving with the efficiency of someone who'd dealt with disaster before. Wade and Cal were already outside, checking the horses and preparing to ride back. Wade's face was drawn and exhausted, but his jaw was set with determination. Cal looked like he hadn't slept at all. They rode as a group, Wade, Cal, Clara, with Eli in front of her and June behind, and 2 of Martha's sons acting as escorts. The journey back seemed longer than Clara remembered, the landscape transformed by fire into something alien and hostile. Blackened earth stretched in every direction. Smoke still rose in places where embers smoldered. The smell was overwhelming, burned grass, destroyed wood, death. When they finally reached what had been Wade's ranch, Clara heard June gasp behind her. The house still stood, but barely. The porch was gone, burned away to charred stumps. The barn was completely destroyed, just a heap of blackened timber and twisted metal. The chicken coop had vanished, the garden was ash, the corrals were burned to the ground, but the house itself had survived, probably saved by Clara's desperate work with wet blankets and by some miracle of wind direction that had pushed the worst of the flames past instead of through. Wade sat on his horse for a long moment, just staring. Then he dismounted and walked slowly toward what remained of his home. Clara got the children down and held their hands as they followed Wade through the destruction. Everything they'd owned that had been outside the house was gone. Tools, equipment, lumber, everything. The well had survived, and the creek, though it was sluggish and choked with ash, still flowed. But beyond that, the ranch was devastated. Inside the house, the damage was less severe but still heartbreaking. Everything was covered in soot and ash. The windows were broken. The floors were covered in debris. But the structure was sound, the roof intact, the walls standing. Wade walked from room to room in silence, his face unreadable. Cal followed him, looking lost. June cried quietly, and Eli clung to Clara with desperate strength. Finally, Wade stopped in the main room and turned to face them all. "We rebuild," he said simply. Cal's head came up. "Daddy?" "We rebuild," Wade repeated, his voice gaining strength. "This land is ours. This house is ours. Roy Hale or the drought or fire from hell itself doesn't change that. We rebuild." Cal stared at his father like he was seeing him for the first time. "How? We don't have money for lumber. We have hands," Wade interrupted. "We have backs. We have will. That's enough to start." He looked at Clara then, and something in his expression had changed. The hollow man who'd bought her for $40 was gone. In his place stood someone harder, someone determined, someone who'd finally found a reason to fight. "If you want to leave," Wade said quietly, "I'll take you to town. I'll give you what money I can spare. No one would blame you for walking away from this mess." Clara looked around at the destroyed ranch, at the 3 children watching her with desperate hope in their eyes, at this man who was finally choosing to stand and fight instead of just survive. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "I told these children I'd stay, and I meant it. We rebuild together." Wade's throat worked. He nodded once, sharp and grateful. "All right then," he said. "Let's get to work." They spent the day salvaging what they could. Martha's sons helped dig through the barn ruins, finding tools that had survived, equipment that could be cleaned and used. Clara and June worked on clearing the house, hauling out debris, washing soot from walls and floors. Cal and Wade started clearing the burned corrals, planning where to rebuild. Eli stayed close to Clara all day, helping where he could, his small face serious and determined. By evening, they had the house livable again, barely. It was dirty and damaged, but it had beds and a working stove and walls that kept out the wind. Martha's sons headed back to their own ranch, promising to return with supplies and help when they could spare it. That night, they all slept in the main room together, too exhausted and too shaken to separate. Wade sat in a chair by the window, his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. Cal slept on the floor near his father. June and Eli curled up on a makeshift pallet Clara had made from salvaged blankets. And Clara sat awake long after the children had fallen asleep, watching Wade keep his vigil, and wondered how they were going to survive what came next. Because the fire was over, but the real battle hadn't even started yet. Roy Hale was still out there. The drought hadn't broken. The ranch was destroyed. And somewhere in the darkness, Clara could almost feel eyes watching them, waiting for the next moment of weakness, the next opportunity to strike. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and settled in to wait for dawn. Dawn came with no promise of mercy, just another brutal sun rising over blackened earth. Clara woke to find Wade already gone, his rifle missing from where it had rested against the chair. Through the broken window, she could see him standing at the edge of what had been the barn, staring at the ruins like he could will them back into existence through sheer force of determination. She slipped outside quietly, leaving the children sleeping. The morning air was still thick with the smell of smoke and ash, and when she breathed deep, her lungs protested. Wade didn't turn when she approached, didn't acknowledge her presence, just kept staring at the destroyed structure with an expression that was equal parts grief and rage. "Martha told me about Roy's first family," Clara said quietly. "About the fire." Wade's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at her. "Martha talks too much." She talks enough. She said the fire that killed them was called an accident, but that nobody really believed it. Nobody could prove otherwise. Wade's voice was flat, dead. Roy was in Helena when it happened, had witnesses. The marshal investigated and found nothing suspicious. Just a tragic accident. Lamp knocked over, house went up fast, family died in their sleep. He finally turned to face her, and his eyes were hollow. Convenient, wasn't it? Wife who wanted to leave him, 2 children she was planning to take, all gone in one night, and Roy walked away with insurance money and a clean slate. Clara felt cold despite the rising heat. You think he paid someone to do it? I think Roy Hale is capable of anything. I think he's been circling this ranch like a vulture for 2 years, waiting for me to fail so he can swoop in and take everything. And I think that fire yesterday wasn't an act of nature. Wade's hands clenched into fists. But thinking it and proving it are 2 different things. What are you going to do? Wade was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the ruined barn. I'm going to rebuild this place. I'm going to keep my children safe. And I'm going to make damn sure Roy Hale doesn't get 1 inch of my land. He looked at Clara again, something fierce and protective in his expression. You should know what you're staying for. This isn't going to get easier. Roy's going to come at us harder now that we're vulnerable. He's going to use every trick he knows to drive us out or destroy us completely. I know, Clara said simply, and you're still staying. I made a promise to those children. I don't break my promises. Something shifted in Wade's face, a crack in the armor he'd built around himself. Mary would have liked you, he said quietly. She would have trusted you with them. Before Clara could respond, the sound of approaching horses made them both turn. 4 riders came up the road, and Clara's heart sank when she recognized the lead rider's broad shoulders and confident seat. Roy Hale had come calling again. Wade's hand went to his hip where his gun usually sat, then dropped when he remembered he'd left the rifle inside. Clara moved slightly closer to him, presenting a united front even though her pulse was hammering with fear. Roy and his men stopped a respectful distance from the house, but there was nothing respectful in the way Roy smiled as he surveyed the damage. Heard you had some trouble, Roy called out, his voice carrying false sympathy. Terrible thing, wildfire. Especially in drought conditions like these. A man could lose everything. What do you want, Roy? Wade's voice was hard as iron. Roy dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, making it clear he wasn't threatened or hurried. Just being neighborly, Wade. Thought I'd come to see if you needed any help. Maybe discuss some options for your situation. We don't need your help, and we don't have a situation. No? Roy gestured at the burned barn, the destroyed corrals, the ash-covered land. Looks like a situation to me. Looks like a man who's one disaster away from losing everything he's got left. His eyes slid to Clara, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. Of course, I understand pride. Man wants to take care of his own, but pride doesn't rebuild barns or feed cattle or keep children clothed through winter. Get to your point, Wade said through gritted teeth. Roy's smile widened. I'll buy you out. Fair price, more than fair, considering the circumstances. Enough money to relocate somewhere easier, start fresh without the weight of this place dragging you down. You could take those kids somewhere with schools and churches and a future that doesn't involve breaking your back on burned ground. This land isn't for sale. Everything's for sale, Wade. It's just a matter of price. Roy pulled a folded paper from his jacket and held it up. I took the liberty of having a contract drawn up. Generous terms. You'd walk away with enough to set yourself up comfortable anywhere you wanted to go. Wade didn't move to take the paper. You can take that contract and... Daddy! Cal's voice cut through the tension. The boy stood on the porch, his face pale but his stance aggressive. Don't take nothing from him. Don't even listen. Roy turned his smile on Cal, and it was like watching a snake size up prey. Boy's got spirit. That's good. He'll need it when this place fails and you've got nothing left to give him but broken dreams and empty promises. You need to leave, Clara said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. You're not welcome here. Roy's attention snapped to her, and his expression shifted into something darker, more predatory. Still here, are you? Thought maybe you'd have the sense to run when things got dangerous, or maybe... His eyes traveled over her slowly. Maybe you like dangerous. Maybe you're the kind of girl who enjoys a challenge. Wade moved before Clara could blink, putting himself between her and Roy. You speak to her again. You even look at her wrong. And neighbor or not, I will put you in the ground. The air went electric with tension. Roy's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. Cal ran back inside, presumably for Wade's rifle. Clara's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. Roy raised his hands in mock surrender, that infuriating smile never leaving his face. Easy now, Wade. No need for threats. I'm just making observations. He backed toward his horse, movement slow and deliberate. But you think about my offer. Think real hard, because the next disaster might not leave you with anything worth saving. And when that day comes, I might not be feeling so generous. He mounted his horse and looked down at them, his smile gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. Oh, and Wade, I heard the marshal's office got a complaint about your land deed. Something about irregularities in the original filing. They'll probably be sending someone out to verify your claim. Just thought you should know. Clara felt Wade go rigid beside her. What are you talking about? Not my business, really, but you know how it is. Paperwork gets lost, records get confused. Sometimes what a man thinks he owns turns out to be questionable. Roy gathered his reins. Good luck with all that. And with the rebuilding. You're going to need it. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following. They disappeared down the road, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of veiled threats. Wade stood frozen, his breathing harsh and rapid. Cal emerged from the house with the rifle, but it was too late. The moment had passed. Daddy, what did he mean about the deed? Cal asked, his voice tight with worry. Wade didn't answer immediately. He just turned and walked back toward the house, his shoulders rigid with tension. Clara and Cal followed him inside, where June and Eli had woken and were huddled together, eyes wide with fear. Wade went straight to a cabinet in the corner of the main room and pulled out a wooden box. Inside were papers, the ranch deed, receipts, correspondence, the fragile paper trail that proved this land was his. He spread them on the table with shaking hands and began going through each document with increasing desperation. The deed's here, he said, holding up a yellowed paper covered in official-looking script and seals. It's legal. It's registered. Everything's in order. Then why would Roy say there's a problem? Clara asked gently. Because he's trying to rattle me, or because... Wade stopped, his face going pale. Or because he's going to manufacture a problem. Cal leaned over the table, studying the papers. How can he do that? If the deed's legal, Roy has money and connections. He could pay someone at the land office to discover irregularities, to claim the original filing was improper, to tie this up in legal proceedings for months or years. Wade's hands clenched on the edge of the table. And while we're fighting in court, paying lawyers we can't afford, he can sit back and wait for us to run out of resources and give up. Clara felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. They'd survived the fire, only to face this, an enemy who could destroy them without ever lifting a weapon, who could use the law itself as a tool to take what he wanted. There has to be something we can do, June said quietly. She'd come to stand beside Clara, her small hand finding Clara's and gripping tight. We can't just let him take our home. Wade looked at his daughter, and Clara saw something crack in his expression, the realization that he couldn't protect his children from this, that all his strength and determination might not be enough against an enemy like Roy Hale. I don't know what to do, he admitted, and the words seemed to cost him everything. I don't know how to fight this. The silence that followed was devastating. These children had just watched their father, their rock, their protector, admit defeat before the battle had even truly begun. Clara looked at the papers spread across the table, at Wade's defeated posture, at the children's frightened faces, and felt something harden in her chest. She'd been sold like property, brought to this place against her will, thrown into a situation she'd never asked for. But these children had become hers somehow. This broken family had wrapped itself around her heart, and she'd be damned if she was going to stand by and watch Roy Hale destroy them. Then we find out how to fight it, Clara said firmly. We go to town. We talk to the land office, verify that everything's in order. We find a lawyer if we need one. We make sure every piece of paper, every signature, every seal is exactly where it should be. She looked at Wade directly. And if Roy's manufactured evidence of irregularities, we find proof that he's behind it. Wade raised his head, meeting her eyes. You don't know what you're suggesting. Taking on Roy Hale directly, I know exactly what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting we stop reacting to his threats and start fighting back. Clara moved to the table and began gathering the papers carefully. Martha said Roy's first family died in a fire he called an accident. That means somewhere. There's probably evidence that it wasn't. Insurance records, investigation reports, something that shows a pattern of behavior. Even if such evidence exists, it's 8 years old. The case is closed. No one's going to reopen it based on suspicions. Wade's voice was heavy with defeat. Maybe not. But if we can find enough to establish that Roy has a history of using fire to get what he wants, it might be enough to cast doubt on the convenience of our fire happening right when he's pressuring you to sell. Clara met Wade's eyes steadily. And if the marshal starts asking questions about the timing, about Roy's whereabouts the day the fire started, about who benefits most from us being destroyed, well, that's a conversation Roy probably doesn't want to have. Cal straightened, hope flickering in his expression. She's right, Daddy. Roy's been getting away with things because nobody's challenged him. Maybe it's time someone did. Wade looked between Clara and his son, something shifting in his expression. The defeat was still there, but underneath it, Clara saw a spark of the man he used to be, the fighter, the protector, the father who wouldn't back down when his family was threatened. It's dangerous, he said quietly. Roy doesn't take kindly to people who stand up to him. If we do this, if we really go after him, he's going to come back at us with everything he's got. He's already doing that, Clara pointed out. The only question is whether we're going to fight back or just wait for him to finish us off. Wade was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Then he nodded slowly. All right, we fight, but we do it smart. No rash moves, no confrontations we can't win. We gather evidence, we secure our legal standing, and we make damn sure every step we take is unassailable. When do we start? Cal asked, his young face set with determination. Now, Wade said. Clara, can you manage things here with June and Eli while Cal and I ride to town? Clara hesitated. The thought of Wade and Cal going to town while she stayed behind with the younger children made her uneasy, but she understood the practicality of it. How long will you be gone? 2 days? Maybe 3? We'll verify the deed at the land office, talk to the marshal about the fire, see what we can find out about Roy's history. Wade looked at his children. June, you'll help Clara with everything she needs. Eli, you be good and do what you're told. Both of you stay close to the house and don't wander off for any reason. Yes, Daddy, June whispered. Eli just nodded, his eyes huge. Wade and Cal prepared to leave quickly, packing supplies and saddling horses. Clara walked outside with them, and Wade pulled her aside while Cal was checking the saddle straps. If Roy comes back while I'm gone, Wade said quietly, you get the children inside and you bar the door. You don't talk to him, you don't let him onto the property. If he tries to force his way in, you use the rifle. Understand? Clara nodded, her mouth dry. Wade reached out and, to her surprise, took her hand. His palm was rough and warm against hers. You've been braver than anyone had a right to expect. Mary, his voice caught. Mary would have been grateful that you're here with them. I'm grateful. Before Clara could respond, he released her hand and mounted his horse. Cal did the same, and together they rode out, leaving Clara standing in the yard with ash settling around her feet and the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She turned back to the house and found June and Eli watching from the doorway. It's just us for a few days, Clara said, keeping her voice steady and calm. We're going to keep working on cleaning up, and we're going to be careful and smart, and everything's going to be fine. June nodded, but her expression said she didn't quite believe it. Eli came down the steps and took Clara's hand, holding on tight. They went inside together, and Clara barred the door behind them, Wade's warnings echoing in her mind. The first day passed without incident. Clara kept the children busy with cleaning and organizing, turning the work into a game for Eli, while June helped with the more difficult tasks. They scrubbed soot from walls, aired out blankets, salvaged what they could from the damaged rooms. It was exhausting work, but it kept them occupied and gave them a sense of purpose. That night, Clara made dinner from their dwindling supplies and tried to keep the conversation light, telling stories about her childhood, asking June and Eli about their memories of happier times. June talked haltingly about her mother's garden, about how Mary had taught her the names of herbs and flowers. Eli listened with rapt attention, clearly trying to hold on to memories that were fading despite his desperate attempts to preserve them. They slept in the main room again, all three of them together. Clara kept the rifle within easy reach and woke at every sound, the wind rattling the broken windows, an owl calling in the distance, the settling of the damaged house around them. The second day started the same way, with work and watchfulness and the constant awareness that they were alone and vulnerable. Clara was in the garden area, trying to salvage any seeds that might have survived the fire, when June came running from the house, her face pale. "Someone's coming," June gasped. "I saw dust on the road." Clara dropped the tools she'd been using and ran for the house. She grabbed the rifle and positioned herself by the window, telling June to take Eli to the back room and stay there until Clara called for them. Her heart pounded as she watched the road. "Please let it be Wade and Cal coming back early," she prayed silently. "Please don't let it be Roy." But the rider who emerged from the dust wasn't Wade or Cal or Roy. It was a woman, Martha Holt, riding fast and alone, her face grim with purpose. Clara lowered the rifle and went outside to meet her. Martha dismounted quickly, her movements urgent. "We've got trouble," Martha said without preamble. "Roy was in town yesterday, making noise about Wade's deed being fraudulent. He's got the land office clerk in his pocket, man named Peterson, who owes Roy money from gambling debts. Peterson's been telling anyone who will listen that there are irregularities in Wade's claim." Clara's stomach dropped. "Can he actually invalidate the deed?" "Not legally, no, but he can create enough doubt to tie things up in court for months, and that's not the worst of it." Martha's expression darkened. "Roy's also been spreading rumors about you, saying Wade bought you from a traveling preacher, that you're living in sin under his roof, that it's immoral, and Wade should have his children taken away until he can provide a proper Christian household." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "He can't. They wouldn't. The territorial judge is a friend of Roy's. If Roy pushes hard enough, if he can get enough righteous citizens worked up about the moral corruption happening at Wade's ranch, he could force a hearing. And if that happens," Martha didn't need to finish. "If it happened, the children could be removed from Wade's care. The family would be destroyed from the inside out." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "What can we do?" "Depends. Where's Wade?" "He and Cal went to town. They left yesterday morning to verify the deed and talk to the marshal." Martha's face went pale. "They're walking straight into Roy's trap. If Peterson's already spreading lies and Roy's waiting for them, Clara, Wade could end up in jail on some trumped-up charge, and then Roy could claim the children need protection from an absent, irresponsible father." Clara made a decision in that instant. "Stay here with June and Eli. I'm going to town." "You can't ride that far alone. It's 2 days, but then I'll ride fast and make it in one. I have to warn Wade. I have to stop whatever Roy's planning before it's too late." Martha grabbed Clara's arm. "Listen to me, girl. Going to town alone without a man to vouch for you, especially with Roy spreading rumors about your character, you could make things worse. Or I could save this family." Clara pulled her arm free gently. "I didn't ask to be here, Martha. I didn't ask to be bought like livestock and brought to a dying ranch with 3 broken children and a man too buried in grief to see what he still had worth saving. But I'm here now, and those children are counting on me, and I will not stand by while Roy Hale destroys them." Martha stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "You've got steel in you. Good. You're going to need it." She moved to her horse and pulled a small leather pouch from her saddlebag. "Money. Not much, but enough for a hotel room if you need it, and maybe a wire to the territorial marshal if things get bad. And take this." She handed Clara a small derringer, pearl-handled and deadly. "It's only got 2 shots, so make them count. Keep it hidden unless you absolutely need it, and if you do need it, don't hesitate." Martha's eyes were hard. "Roy Hale doesn't fight fair. Neither should you." Clara took the gun, feeling its weight in her palm. She'd never shot anyone, never even pointed a weapon at another human being. The thought of doing so made her sick, but the thought of Roy Hale destroying Wade and his children made her even sicker. She went inside and found June and Eli still hiding in the back room. She knelt down and pulled them both close. "I have to go help your father," she said quietly. Mrs. Holt is going to stay with you until I get back. I need you both to be brave and good and do exactly what she tells you. Can you do that for me? You're coming back? Eli's voice was tiny, terrified. I promise, Clara said fiercely. I will come back. Nothing is going to keep me from coming back to you. She hugged them both tight, feeling their small arms wrap around her, feeling the trust they'd placed in her like a physical weight. Then she stood and went to saddle the fastest horse Wade owned. Martha came to see her off, her weathered face creased with worry. You ride careful. You keep your wits about you. And if things go wrong, if Roy corners you or threatens you, you get to the marshal. His name is Tom Brennan, and he's one of the few honest men left in that town. Clara nodded and mounted up. She looked back at the house one more time, at the broken windows and ash-stained walls, at the place that had somehow become something like home in just 2 short weeks. Then she turned the horse toward town and rode. She pushed hard, stopping only to rest the horse and take water from her canteen. The sun beat down mercilessly, and by afternoon her skin was burned and her body ached from the pace. But she kept going, driven by fear and determination in equal measure. As the sun began to set, she could see the town in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings huddled together on the prairie. Smoke rising from chimneys, lamplight beginning to glow in windows. She slowed the horse to a walk, trying to make herself presentable, trying to calm the hammering of her heart. She had no plan beyond finding Wade and warning him, no strategy for dealing with Roy or Peterson or any of the other threats Martha had described. She was a girl who'd been sold for $40, riding into a strange town alone, trying to save a family that wasn't even really hers. But as she rode down the main street, searching for any sign of Wade or Cal, Clara felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that whatever happened next, she was done being powerless. She was done being the girl who got bought and sold and pushed around by men who thought they had the right. Roy Hale wanted a fight. Well, he was about to get one. And Clara May Winslow was done being afraid. She found Wade and Cal at the marshal's office, standing in the street arguing with a heavy-set man wearing a badge and an expression of practiced indifference. Clara dismounted and tied her horse quickly, her legs shaking from the hard ride, but she forced herself to walk steadily toward them. Wade's head snapped up when he saw her, his face going pale. Clara, what are you doing here? Where are June and Eli? Safe with Martha. Wade, it's a trap. Roy's got the land office clerk spreading lies about your deed, and he's been in town telling anyone who'll listen that you bought me like property and that you're unfit to raise your children. The words tumbled out fast and urgent. Martha came to warn us. She said Roy's planning to have you arrested or the children taken or both. The marshal, a thick-necked man with cold eyes, crossed his arms over his chest. That's quite an accusation, miss. You got any proof Roy Hale's behind anything? Just his pattern of behavior and the timing, Clara shot back. Convenient how all these problems started appearing right after he made Wade an offer on the ranch, isn't it? Convenient isn't illegal. The marshal's expression didn't change. And frankly, miss, the way I hear it, you're part of the problem. Respectable rancher doesn't buy himself a girl barely old enough to be married and install her in his house with his children. People have concerns. Clara felt rage boil up in her chest, hot and fierce. People have concerns fed to them by a man who wants Wade's land and doesn't care how he gets it. Roy Hale's first family died in a fire he called an accident. Now Wade's ranch burns under suspicious circumstances right when Roy's pressuring him to sell. You don't see a pattern there, Marshal. The marshal's eyes narrowed. You're talking about a closed case from 8 years ago. That fire was investigated thoroughly. Roy Hale was cleared. Cleared or bought off? Clara demanded. How much money does it take to make an investigation go away in this territory? The marshal's hand moved to his gun belt, not threatening exactly, but a warning. Careful, girl. Those are serious accusations, the kind that could land you in a cell for slander. Wade stepped between them, his face tight with barely controlled anger. Marshal Brennan, we came here in good faith to verify our land deed and report suspicious activity. If you're not willing to do your job, just say so and we'll take our business to the territorial authorities. Your deed's being reviewed by the land office, Brennan said flatly. Peterson found some irregularities that need clarification. Until that's resolved, you don't have clear title to that property. What irregularities? Cal demanded, his voice cracking with fury. We have the original deed properly signed and sealed. We have receipts for taxes paid every year since my grandfather filed the claim. What more do you need? That's between you and the land office, Brennan replied. I don't make those determinations. But you do make arrests, Clara said quietly, and I'm guessing Roy's hoping you'll find some excuse to lock Wade up while all this gets sorted out. Maybe a charge of contributing to the delinquency of minors or keeping an indentured servant? Something that sounds bad enough to justify taking his children away while he fights it? Brennan's face flushed red. You've got a smart mouth for a girl in your position. My position? Clara took a step forward, her fear burning away in the heat of her anger. My position is standing next to a man who's worked himself half to death trying to keep his family together after losing his wife. My position is protecting 3 children who've already lost too much. And my position is not backing down to bullies who hide behind badges and false respectability while doing Roy Hale's dirty work. The street had gone quiet around them. People were watching now, drawn by the raised voices and the spectacle of a young woman confronting the town marshal. Clara could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting, but she didn't care anymore. Let them whisper. Let them judge. She was done being silent. Wade's hand found her elbow, gentle but insistent. Clara, that's enough. No, it's not enough. Clara turned to face the growing crowd. Roy Hale wants everyone to believe Wade Carver is unfit to own his land or raise his children. He wants you all to think I'm some kind of bought woman living in sin, that Wade's a bad father, that those 3 children need to be taken away for their own good. But I'll tell you what's really happening. Roy Hale wants that ranch because it controls water rights he can use to squeeze every other rancher in this territory. He's been circling that property like a vulture since Mary Carver died, and now that he can't buy it legally, he's trying to steal it through lies and manipulation. A woman in a severe black dress pushed to the front of the crowd. Is it true Wade bought you from a traveling preacher? Clara met her eyes steadily. Yes. My stepfather sold me for $40 to a man I'd never met. I had no choice in the matter. But what I've chosen since then is to help a family that needed it. I've chosen to care for 3 children who were drowning in grief. I've chosen to stand by people who are being persecuted by a rich man who thinks his money gives him the right to destroy anyone who stands in his way. Another voice called out, You living in sin with Wade Carver? I sleep in a room by myself and spend my nights comforting a 5-year-old boy who has nightmares about his dead mother, Clara said, her voice ringing clear. The only sin happening at that ranch is the sin of being too poor and too vulnerable to fight back when powerful men come calling with threats and ultimatums. Wade was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. Cal stood frozen beside his father, his young face flushed with emotion. An older man with silver hair and expensive clothes stepped forward from the crowd. I'm Judge Harrison. I've heard some concerning reports about the Carver household. Perhaps it would be best if we arranged for the children to stay with appropriate families while these matters get sorted out. No. The word came from Cal, loud and fierce. He moved to stand beside Clara, his shoulders back, his chin up. Nobody's taking me or my brother and sister anywhere. We're staying with our father. We're staying with Clara. And if Roy Hale has a problem with that, he can come say it to my face instead of hiding behind lies and bought officials. Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose. Young man, you should watch your tone. Why? Cal shot back. So I can be respectful while you tear my family apart? So I can be polite while Roy Hale steals everything my grandfather built? My mother was terrified of Roy Hale before she died. She told people he was following her, watching her, making her afraid in her own town. And nobody did anything then either. Nobody wanted to stand up to him because he has money and influence and friends in high places. The crowd was murmuring now, a low susurrus of shock and speculation. Clara saw Judge Harrison's face tighten with anger, saw Marshal Brennan's hand move closer to his gun. Then a new voice cut through the tension, clear and authoritative. That's a serious accusation, son. You got any evidence to back it up? Clara turned and saw a tall man in a dusty suit pushing through the crowd. He had steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, and he wore a badge that was different from Brennan's. Territorial marshal, not just local law. Wade straightened. Marshal Kane, I didn't know you were in town. Got word there were some irregularities with land claims in this district. Thought I'd come see for myself. Kane's eyes moved over the assembled group. Wade, Clara, Cal, Brennan, the judge, the watching crowd. Seems I arrived at an interesting time. Now, somebody want to explain what's going on here? The story came out in pieces, with Wade and Clara and Cal all contributing. The fire, Roy's visits and threats, the convenient discovery of deed irregularities, the rumors about Clara's presence, the implications that Wade was unfit as a father. Judge Harrison tried to interrupt several times, and Marshal Brennan attempted to downplay the accusations, but Kane silenced them both with a sharp look. When they'd finished, Kane was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Brennan. "You investigated this fire?" "Lightning strike," Brennan said quickly. "Natural causes." "You verify that? Check for signs of arson? Question any witnesses?" Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "Didn't seem necessary. Drought conditions, dry grass. So that's a no." Kane turned to Judge Harrison. "And you were planning to remove children from their father based on what evidence exactly?" "Reports of improper conduct," Harrison said stiffly. "A young woman of questionable morals living under his roof. She's helping raise his children after his wife died," Kane interrupted. "That's called being a housekeeper, Judge. Last I checked, that wasn't illegal or immoral." His gaze swept over the crowd. "As for Roy Hale's accusations, I'll be looking into those myself, and I'll be reviewing that land office investigation too. Peterson, you here?" A thin, nervous-looking man near the back of the crowd raised his hand reluctantly. "Good. You and I are going to go over every detail of Wade Carver's deed, and you're going to explain to me exactly what irregularities you found. And it better be more substantial than what Roy Hale paid you to say." Peterson went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. We'll discuss it at my office." Kane's expression was hard as granite. "As for the rest of you, show's over. Go on about your business." The crowd began to disperse slowly, people talking in low voices, casting curious glances back at Clara and Wade. Judge Harrison left quickly, his face tight with barely suppressed anger. Brennan lingered for a moment, then followed the judge, his shoulders rigid. When they were relatively alone, Kane turned back to Wade. "I need you to tell me everything about Roy Hale. Everything he's said, everything he's done, going back as far as you can remember. And I want to know about your wife, what she said about him, why she was afraid." Wade's throat worked. "It was 2 years ago. I don't know if anyone will believe—" "I'll believe what the evidence supports," Kane said firmly. "But I can't investigate what I don't know about. So talk to me." They moved to a quieter location, a small office Kane had secured for his investigation. Clara sat beside Wade while he told the story of Mary's final months, the fear in her eyes when she mentioned seeing Roy in town, the way she'd asked to move away from the ranch. Cal added details. Times he'd seen Roy watching the house from a distance, conversations he'd overheard between his parents late at night when they thought the children were asleep. Clara told about Roy's visits to the ranch, about the way he'd looked at her, the threats veiled in friendly concern, Martha's warnings about Roy's first family dying in a fire that was ruled accidental, but that everyone suspected was murder. Kane took notes, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When they'd finished, he sat back and tapped his pencil against his notepad. "Here's what I know," he said quietly. Roy Hale's been investigated 3 times in the past 10 years for various offenses: fraud, intimidation, suspected arson. Every time the case got dropped due to lack of evidence or witnesses suddenly refusing to testify. He's got enough money to make problems disappear and enough connections to avoid consequences. He looked at Wade directly. "But patterns matter, and the pattern here is clear enough that I can open an official investigation." "What does that mean for us?" Wade asked. "It means I'm going to dig into that fire on your property. I'm going to review the investigation into his first family's deaths. I'm going to talk to everyone who's ever had dealings with Roy Hale and see what shakes loose." Kane's expression softened slightly. "But I need you to understand, this is going to take time. And while I'm investigating, Roy's going to push back hard. He's not going to sit idle while I dig into his business." "So we go home and wait?" Clara asked. "You go home and you're careful. You document everything. Every visit Roy makes, every threat, every suspicious occurrence. You keep those children close, and you don't give him any ammunition to use against you." Kane looked at Clara. "That means you keep your head down, miss. I know you've got fire in you and I respect it, but Roy's already using your presence as leverage. Don't give him more. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to say she wasn't going to hide or apologize for helping this family, but she saw the wisdom in Kane's words and nodded reluctantly. They left Kane's office as the sun was setting, the sky streaked with orange and red that reminded Clara too much of fire. Wade was quiet, his face drawn with exhaustion. Cal walked close to his father, his earlier bravado faded into worry. "We need to stay in town tonight," Wade said quietly. "It's too dangerous to ride back in the dark, and the horses need rest." They found rooms at a small hotel, and Clara collapsed onto the narrow bed in hers, every muscle in her body screaming from the hard ride and the tension of the confrontation. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept circling back to Roy's threats, to Judge Harrison's cold eyes, to the knowledge that this fight was far from over. A soft knock on her door brought her sitting upright. Wade's voice came through the wood, low and hesitant. "Clara, can we talk?" She opened the door and found him standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands, his expression uncertain. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, "for what you did today, for standing up to Brennan and the judge and all those people. You didn't have to do that. You could have stayed quiet, let me handle it. And watch them destroy you? Not a chance." Clara leaned against the doorframe, suddenly aware of how close he was standing, of the way the lamplight caught in his dark eyes. Wade was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "When I bought you from that preacher, I thought I was just getting help with the house and the children. Someone to cook and clean and make sure they didn't burn the place down while I was out working." He met her eyes. "I never expected you to become part of this family. I never expected my children to love you. And I never expected—" He stopped, his throat working. "Expected what?" Clara asked softly. "To start hoping again," Wade said, the words barely above a whisper. "To look at you with my children and see something that looks like a future instead of just survival. To think maybe we could be more than just broken pieces held together by necessity." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Wade, I know it's too soon. I know I've got no right to feel anything for you when I paid for you like property. I know—" He stopped when Clara reached out and took his hand. "You're right. It is too soon," she said gently. "We barely know each other. We've been thrown together by circumstances neither of us chose, and we're in the middle of a fight that could destroy everything." She squeezed his hand. "But that doesn't mean there's nothing here worth protecting. That doesn't mean we can't build something real once the dust settles." Wade looked down at their joined hands, his thumb moving slowly over her knuckles. "If the dust settles." "It will," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. "We'll make sure it does." They stood like that for a long moment, the hallway quiet around them, neither one willing to let go first. Then Wade raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her fingers. "Get some rest," he said quietly. "We've got a long ride home tomorrow." He left before Clara could respond, disappearing into his own room. Clara closed her door and leaned against it, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. She was falling for him. Somewhere between the burnt porridge and the wildfire, between Eli's nightmares and June's tentative smiles, between Cal's anger and Wade's slowly thawing heart, she'd started to care about this family in a way that had nothing to do with obligation or survival and everything to do with something deeper, more dangerous, more real. And that terrified her almost as much as Roy Hale did. The ride back to the ranch took most of the next day. They arrived to find Martha on the porch with a rifle across her knees, and June and Eli playing in the yard under her watchful eye. The children ran to meet them, Eli launching himself at Clara with such force he nearly knocked her over. "You came back," he said against her shoulder, his small voice muffled. "You promised, and you came back." "Of course I did," Clara murmured, holding him tight. "I'll always come back." June hugged Wade, then Cal, then Clara, her eyes bright with relief. Martha stood and stretched, her expression tired but satisfied. "Any trouble?" Wade asked. "Roy sent one of his men around yesterday, asking questions about where you'd gone. I told him it was none of his damn business and suggested he remove himself from the property before I removed him myself." Martha's smile was sharp. "He left." Wade nodded grimly and went to tend the horses. Clara carried Eli inside, June trailing behind, and Martha followed them into the house. "How bad was it?" Martha asked once the children were occupied. Clara told her about the confrontation, about Marshal Kane's investigation, about the tenuous hope that maybe, finally, someone in authority was willing to stand up to Roy Hale. Martha listened carefully, her face growing more thoughtful. "Kane's a good man, one of the few who can't be bought. But he's also methodical. He won't move until he has ironclad evidence. And getting that evidence against someone like Roy—" She shook her head. "It won't be easy or fast. What do we do in the meantime?" "Exactly what Kane said. Document everything. Stay alert. Protect those children." Martha stood and moved to the window, looking out at the burned landscape. "And hope that Roy doesn't do something desperate before Kane can finish his investigation." The next week passed in an uneasy peace. Wade and Cal worked on rebuilding the corrals, salvaging what lumber they could from the barn ruins and cutting new posts where needed. Clara and June tackled the house, making it livable again despite the damage. Eli shadowed Clara constantly, his small hand finding hers whenever he felt uncertain. Roy didn't come around, but his presence was felt anyway, in the way other ranchers suddenly found reasons not to trade with Wade, in the whispers that followed them to church on Sunday, in the cold stares from townspeople who'd decided Clara was a corrupting influence. But there were allies, too. Martha brought supplies and stayed to help with the heavy work. A few neighboring ranchers, men who'd known Wade's father, who remembered when the Carver Ranch was thriving, came by with offers of lumber and labor. Even the preacher, a kind-eyed man named Reverend Matthews, made a point of greeting Clara warmly after services and making it clear he saw nothing improper in her presence at the ranch. "People talk," he told her quietly one Sunday, "but talk is just noise. What matters is what you do, how you live, who you help. And from what I've seen, you're doing right by those children." Clara held on to those words during the hard days when the whispers felt too loud and the judgment too heavy. Then, 3 weeks after their confrontation in town, Marshal Kane rode up to the ranch with news. Wade met him in the yard, Clara and the children gathering on the porch. Kane dismounted slowly, his expression serious. "I've been digging," he said without preamble, "and I found something. Roy's first wife, the one who died in that fire 8 years ago, she'd filed for divorce 2 months before she died. The paperwork was buried in county records, never processed. But she'd gone to a lawyer in Helena, claimed Roy was violent, that she feared for her life and her children's lives." Wade's face went hard. "And nobody thought that was relevant when she died in a fire?" "The lawyer who filed the paperwork died 6 months after the fire. Fell off his horse, they said. Broke his neck." Kane's expression was grim. "I'm having that case reviewed too, but there's more. I talked to the insurance investigator who looked into the fire on your property. He found evidence of accelerant use, lamp oil poured in multiple locations around the barn. Someone set that fire deliberately." Clara felt her blood run cold. "Roy, can't prove it yet, but I brought the investigator's report to the territorial prosecutor. Combined with the pattern of behavior, the threats multiple witnesses have confirmed, and the evidence from Roy's first wife's case, we have enough to bring charges." "Charges for what?" Cal asked, his voice tight with hope. "Arson, intimidation, conspiracy to defraud, based on Peterson's confession that Roy paid him to manufacture irregularities in your deed." Kane smiled grimly. "Peterson sang like a canary once I explained he could either cooperate or face charges as an accomplice. Gave me names, dates, amounts Roy paid him. Even had receipts the fool kept as insurance in case Roy tried to double-cross him." Wade was shaking his head in disbelief. "This is really happening? You're really going after him?" "Already did. Roy Hale was arrested this morning in Helena. He's being held without bail pending trial." Kane's expression softened slightly. "Your deed is clear and registered properly. Peterson's claims are officially withdrawn and marked as fraudulent. The investigation into your wife's death has been reopened based on new information about Roy's stalking behavior. And the prosecutor's digging into the fire that killed Roy's first family." Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. "It's over?" "The immediate threat is over," Kane corrected gently. "Roy's going to trial, and based on what we have, he's likely going to prison. But trials take time, and until he's convicted, you need to stay alert. He's got money and lawyers, and desperate men do stupid things. Wade nodded slowly, his throat working with emotion. Thank you, Marshal. I don't know how to... You don't need to thank me. I'm just doing my job. Kane tipped his hat. I'll keep you informed as things develop. In the meantime, keep rebuilding. Live your life. Don't let fear of what Roy might do keep you from moving forward. He left them standing in the yard, the weight of 3 weeks' tension suddenly lifting, leaving them almost lightheaded with relief. June started crying first, great gasping sobs of release. Cal wrapped his arms around his sister, his own eyes bright with tears. Eli looked between all the adults, confused but picking up on the emotion, his lower lip trembling. Wade pulled all 3 children into a fierce embrace, and Clara stood watching them, feeling like an outsider in this family moment. Then Wade reached out with one arm and pulled her in two, bringing her into the circle of his family, holding her like she belonged there. Thank you, he said against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for staying. Thank you for... His voice broke, and he couldn't finish. But Clara understood. She wrapped her arms around all of them and held on tight, this family that had been broken and was slowly, painfully learning how to heal. The trial happened in late September, as the heat of summer finally broke and the first hints of autumn touched the air. Claire and Wade traveled to Helena to testify, leaving the children in Martha's capable care. The courtroom was packed with people who'd come to see Roy Hale finally face justice. The evidence was damning. Peterson testified about the bribes. The insurance investigator presented proof of arson. Witnesses came forward to describe Roy's threats and intimidation tactics. And when Wade took the stand to talk about Mary's fears and the pattern of stalking behavior, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Clara testified last, her voice steady as she described Roy's visits to the ranch, his veiled threats, the way he'd looked at her like she was property to be claimed. Roy's lawyers tried to paint her as a liar, as a woman of questionable morals who'd invented stories to help Wade, but the evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Roy Hale was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. The investigation into his first wife's death was ongoing, with prosecutors promising additional charges if evidence of murder could be proven. Wade and Clara walked out of the courthouse into cool autumn air, and for the first time in months, Clara felt like she could breathe fully. It's really over, Wade said quietly, staring up at the blue sky like he'd never seen it before. Yes, Clara agreed. It's really over. They stayed in Helena one more night before heading home. That evening, Wade took Clara to a small restaurant, and over a meal that was the finest thing Clara had eaten in years, he finally said what had been building between them for weeks. I want you to stay, he said quietly, not as hired help, not as someone I bought, but as... He stopped, searching for the right words. As someone I choose, someone who chooses us back, someone who could maybe, someday, be more than just Clara who helps with the children. Clara set down her fork, her heart pounding. What are you asking me, Wade? I'm asking if you could see a future here. With us. With me. His hand found hers across the table. I'm asking if what I feel when I look at you, like the world's a little less broken, like there might be joy again someday, if you might feel something like that too. Clara looked at this man who'd bought her for $40 and somehow given her back her life. This man who'd been so buried in grief he'd forgotten how to be human, but who'd fought his way back for his children. This man who'd learned to trust again, to hope again, to open his heart again despite all the pain it had caused him. I could see a future here, she said softly. I could see building something real with you and those children. I could see... She smiled, feeling tears on her cheeks. I could see choosing you every day for the rest of my life. Wade's answering smile transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter, like the man he must have been before grief carved him down to stone. Then stay, he said. Not because you have nowhere else to go, not because those children need you, but because you want to, because you choose us. I choose you, Clara said firmly. All of you, forever. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church with Reverend Matthews officiating. June wore a dress Martha had helped her make, her face glowing with happiness. Cal stood as Wade's witness, his young shoulders proud and straight, and Eli clung to Clara's hand throughout the ceremony, only letting go when Wade needed to slip a simple gold band onto her finger. The ranch slowly came back to life. With Roy gone and the deed secure, Wade was able to get credit in town again. They rebuilt the barn, repaired the corrals, and by October the ranch was starting to look like a working operation again instead of a disaster site. Clara discovered she was pregnant in early November, and when she told Wade, he pulled her into his arms and held her like she was something precious and fragile and infinitely valuable. "Mary would have loved this," he said quietly. "She would have loved you. She would have been so grateful that you're here with them, with us." Clara thought about the woman she'd never met, the ghost who'd haunted this house for so long. "I hope I'm making her proud." "You are," Wade said with certainty. "You are." Though the baby, a girl they named Hope, was born in April as the prairie came alive with new grass and wildflowers. She had Clara's light hair and Wade's dark eyes, and from the moment Eli first held her, he appointed himself her personal guardian. "I'll protect her," he told Clara solemnly, "like you protected us." Clara kissed his forehead and told him he was the best big brother Hope could ever hope for. June blossomed over the following year, growing from a frightened child into a confident young woman who helped Clara run the household and taught Hope her first words. Cal grew tall and strong, working alongside Wade, learning the ranch business, becoming the man he was always meant to be. And Wade learned to laugh again, to tease his children, to pull Clara into his arms and dance with her in the kitchen while the children giggled, to live instead of just survive. 3 years after Clara had arrived at the ranch as a girl sold for $40, she stood on the porch watching Wade and Cal work in the rebuilt corrals, while June played with Hope and Eli in the yard. The garden was thriving, the barn was solid, and the land, their land, secure and undisputed, stretched green and peaceful in every direction. Martha rode up that afternoon with news from town. Roy Hale had died in prison, his health broken by confinement and the weight of his crimes finally catching up with him. "Good riddance," Martha said bluntly. "World's better without him in it." Clara nodded, feeling nothing but relief that the shadow that had hung over their lives was finally, completely gone. That night, after the children were asleep and Hope was settled in her cradle, Wade pulled Clara out onto the porch to watch the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Being sold to a stranger and ending up here?" Clara thought about the girl she'd been, frightened, powerless, with no hope for her future. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, loved, surrounded by family, with a life she'd built through courage and determination and refusal to give up even when everything seemed impossible. "I regret that I had no choice in coming here," she said honestly. "I regret that I was treated like property instead of a person. But I don't regret what we've built from those broken pieces. I don't regret choosing to stay when I could have left. And I don't regret falling in love with a stubborn rancher and his 3 damaged children who taught me what family really means." Wade kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Clara kissed him back under a sky full of stars. The girl who'd been sold for $40 had found something worth more than all the money in the world. She'd found home, she'd found family, she'd found love, and she'd found herself. The prairie wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, and the promise of tomorrow. Somewhere in the house, a child laughed in her sleep. Somewhere in the barn, horses stirred and settled. And on the porch of a ranch that had almost been lost but had survived against all odds, 2 people stood together, holding on to each other and to the future they'd fought so hard to build. Clara May Carver, no longer Winslow, no longer bought, no longer powerless, smiled into the darkness and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.